polyphony on the keyboard, on the harpsichord, you hear F major, BWV 880, Book 2, Well-Tempered Clavier Prelude, eighth notes flowing, and in the background the held sounds on the harpsichord. And you delay, you make jeu inégal, you emphasize rhetorically the entrances and the flow of the different cascades of voices with articulations, which to do also with fingering. In other words, you dress up the spices of the food and you hear flowing notes. Whenever the held sounds, the whole notes, half notes, decay quickly and are heard by osmosis, by remembering them, perhaps restriking them at some point. Still brisé, you make an arpeggiations where you delay from the root bass to the top note. On the organ, the polyphony was based on the held sounds which don't decay by the essence of the instrument. Again, the instrument tells you what they do and how they bring out the polyphony there on the front with the held sounds. And the passing tones, the flowing cascade of eighth notes are in the background. So the instrument dictates to you the polyphonic choices that you do about the bringing out of the elements, which are constitutive of the texture, the soundscape, if you want, the construction of the resonances, what is passing tone, what is decorative tone through the neighboring tone. And so you have to define which are the blue notes, as we call them, or sometimes whichever color, main notes if you want. For instance, on the piano forte of today, what you can do is choose what to bring out, and then you can make then a soundscape that represents your choice, that directs the attention of the listener by saying, I'm going to highlight this and bring out this. For instance, I can bring out this descending, cascading, held half notes of thirds dropping throughout, which brings a different dimension to the texture. So you have this, which overtakes like almost a rainbow the texture of the descending eighth notes by group of four, or the rising held sounds of the harmonization by whole notes and half notes. And so then you obtain a sort of diagonal cross-pollination of the melodic droppings designed through harmonic thirds of chords. Now, how do we know if Bach would have wanted that, or did he hint it, or suggest it in the texture, writing it for pure polyphony, not for a specific instrument, though it was meant for the harpsichord as an exercise tool, practicing the preludes and fugues in every key with a new tuning, the well-tempered tuning. But it is interesting to see that on the modern piano you have to choose and make, in a way, an idealized picture that is not only what the instrument dictates you should be in tempo, articulation, length of sounds, and therefore even to a certain extent the mood that is not embedded officially in the piece. A prelude is to define the tonality. And then you go for the fugue. the mood comes with a relatively romantic era music where we express emotion through patterns of decoration. Whenever in the Baroque the decorations are the lightest pattern. Then are we supposed to bring out these thirds like that? Because this is something in a way that is a creative interpretation, if interpretation etymologically is translation. Therefore, we change perhaps the message that was intended. And the question is, do we really want only to deal with authenticity, or do we want to appropriate it for what we can do with the resonance of today on the instrument of today? And do we think that we betray the piece? Should we not play it at all unless it's on the original instrument, or should we play it even on the modern instrument but with its own capacities and qualities? And or should we just write preludes for the instrument and not have to just sort of transform the texture of the original piece for the instrument? Though it's difficult to ask to somebody who has a instrument which responds to different lengths of sound with different articulations and qualities. Of course, as long as you can organize them in the independence of the fingers, to ignore this option, this possibility. I still think that this kind of dropping thirds in this prelude can be hinted more than blasted if it were a trumpet or brass instrument. Rather perhaps by a phrased direction with nice, I would say, bringing out the air, rising the phrase to its high point and then dropping slightly on the endings without to do too much dynamic effects for the sake of it, since that was not, of course, intended. Most of Bach's music doesn't start or stop, it just ends, but it continues in a flow that was before and after. I think that is the perpetual motion of Bach's flow of eighth notes. And I would like to suggest that if those 72 bars of eighth notes in 3/2 flow with highlighted chordal progressions that sort of appear like on the tail of a comet or on a rainbow over the lines, and the many eighth notes, I think it's necessarily something to explore for the pianist, with the awareness that is not indicated as such in the notation, which was anyway copied from student generation to next, and the interpretation itself was not indicated so much at all. Of course, not the metronome marking, since there wasn't such yet before 1820s. And then on the other hand, when Bach was writing these, there were partly templates for the students to perhaps redecorate or creatively improvise their own, if instead of doing would have been, or perhaps it's not necessarily a major difference between which interval of the toolbox will you use, but we today play what was written and we reproduce it correctly because we want to be closest to the authenticity of the original text, even if there isn't such per se always to attach ourselves to the sort of original truth. But I would say that it is helpful to enlighten the spirit, to enlarge the horizons by daring and say, perhaps I can bring out something in it that has also that embedded in the notation without to be hinted by accents or held notes, half notes everywhere. It could be sort of creative reshaping of the texture. With or without the fermata at the end. But ultimately, emotion is combined with intelligence in Bach, as structure or architecture with beauty, aesthetic, perhaps aesthetic for his own time period, but universally for ours too, beyond perhaps the sacred and the profane, perhaps just the emotion that the harmonization produces through the patterns of the designs of these flowing eighth notes and these mesmerizing half notes, and perhaps we obtain something that is sort of an organ and a harpsichord in one through the piano that brings out various levels of the texture that is embedded in the notation. But then again, it's in the eye or the ear of the beholder. Thank you.